has made immigration the central issue in his presidency. Now, a new book, Border Wars, Inside Trump's Assault on Immigration, chronicles the president's efforts to upend the nation's immigration system and the drastic proposals he suggested to do so. Joining us now, the authors of that book, Michael Shear and Julie Hirschfeld Davis. They are both New York Times journalists and CNN political analysts. Great to have you guys here. Your book is getting a lot of attention because there's so much meat in there. You talked to the president about this. Here is one passage that has gotten a lot of attention. Let me read it. Privately, the president has often talked about fortifying a border wall with a water-filled trench stocked with snakes or alligators, prompting aides to seek a cost estimate. He wanted the wall electrified with spikes on top that could pierce human flesh. After publicly suggesting that soldiers shoot migrants if they threw rocks, the president backed off when his staff told him that was illegal. But later in a meeting, aides recalled he suggested that they shoot migrants in the legs to slow them down. That's not allowed either, they told him. This does sound like something out of Caligula, frankly, if I may. And the president has said that part, the president has pushed back and said that that's not true. Here's his tweet last week. Now the press is trying to sell the fact that I wanted a moat stuffed with alligators and snakes with an electrified fence and sharp spikes on top at the southern border. I may be tough on border security, but not that tough. The press has gone crazy. Fake news, exclamation point. You guys want to tackle that?
There's a lot there. I mean, the first thing I would say, obviously, is that, you know, we worked on this book for a very long time. We talked to many, many different people who had been in the room with him when he spoke about these various thoughts he would have about ways to make it tougher at the border, harder for people to come across, to have a better deterrent than the United States has right now. And we're very confident in our account, which has been confirmed by other news organizations as well. What I would say is that, you know, I don't think that the president, he doesn't think about these things in the same way that most presidents or politicians would. So when he's musing in a meeting about, well, maybe we could do this and maybe we could do that, you know, he is actually sort of spitballing, right? And a lot of the time, his aides are engaged in a process of what do we actually have to take seriously? What do we actually have to push back against? What do we, for instance, have to go get a cost estimate for? And he talked about a trench so often that was one of the things that they ultimately had to go ask the Army Corps of Engineers. What would it take to actually dig a trench? And they had to go back and tell him it would be 3 times more expensive than an actual wall.
To build a trench and stock it with alligators. Did they go that far?
I do not believe they ever costed out the alligators or the snakes. But they did. I mean, he talked about fortifying this structure so often that a lot of time was spent, a lot of staff time, a lot of time at the White House, a lot of time at the Department of Homeland Security trying to figure out how do we deliver on this vision that the president has.
See, Michael, what I'm struck by is the president so often says something outlandish and then doubles down on it about, say, Mexicans or anything. And the idea that he's somehow embarrassed about that passage, that he's denying it, that's interesting to me. It's different.
Right. Well, and actually that's different than he normally would, because a lot of times he either embraces the tough rhetoric or when he's accused of things in this realm, in the immigration space, he doesn't actually deny it. He pointedly did not, for example, deny the comment that he had said that that migrants should be shot in the legs. He didn't deny that piece. He denied some of the others.
And we should point out that he actually tweeted a picture of the spikes at one point. So that's
for real.
He's owned up to that.
Right.
Yeah. I also want to get to another part in the book that I think is really interesting, because Jared Kushner has been tasked with figuring out a lot of stuff in this administration. And one of them, I guess, was immigration. And after this briefing that he had with them, the head of Customs and Border Protection, Kevin McAleenan, who's now at Department of Homeland Security, Kevin McAleenan explained that a wall was not going to solve the problem.
Right.
And that the problem was bigger than that. And here is what you write in the book. Kushner nodded, his jaw tight and eyes wide. Okay, he said quietly, so we've wasted the last 2 years. Stephen Miller looked stunned. Trump had taken the wrong hostage, and now they were all stuck demanding a ransom that everybody knew would never be paid. How were they going to get out of this? Really? They have been told that the wall won't work and they're still sticking with it?
Yeah, well, they're still sticking with it because it fundamentally is the object, the central piece around which Donald Trump has built his immigration agenda, right? It was the thing that he whipped up his crowds during the campaign. It's the thing that sort of stands as the totem of everything that he wants to do, keeping people out. But I think one of the things that the story about Jared Kushner suggests is that the lack of kind of experience and knowledge. Immigration is a topic where people in Washington have been dealing with this there are people who are experts for decades on kind of trying to break through the immigration gridlock. Jared Kushner's not one of them. And, the fact that he was sort of deputized at that sort of key moment to go over to Congress and try to figure out this sort of shutdown border wall funding mess, I think what he realized in that meeting was that it's a lot more complicated, and that the focus on the wall had really diverted the attention away from the real solutions.
Is there a feeling inside the White House around the president that the wall is not going to work and they should back off it?
No, there is no feeling like that. I mean, I think everyone at the Department of Homeland Security who has worked on this issue for a long time, there are people in the White House who understand that, practically speaking, it is not going to do what the president wants, which is to cut down on both legal and illegal immigration. But they also understand what Mike said is very true, that this is not something the president is ever going to drop. This is something that's a fundamental part of his political identity. It's a big part of the campaign, build the wall. We're building the wall. He's always saying that. He's not going to stop saying that. And so I think what they're engaged in is an effort to try to, while he still talks about that, try to do other things that will deliver on this tough talk about we're going to have less immigration, we're going to have fewer immigrants. But really, I think everyone knows that the wall is not going to do that.
Well, Julie Hirschfeld Davis, Michael Shear, the book is packed with substance and interviews and tidbits like that we read. It's a great read. Border Walls Inside Trump's Assault on Immigration. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
For talking with us. John.
All right, we're learning this morning that Michael Cohen might have new involvement in an investigation into the president. A source tells CNN the president's former personal lawyer and fixer will be allowed to leave prison to meet with state prosecutors in New York. Athena Jones here with the details on that. Interesting, Athena.
Good morning. Interesting indeed. As you mentioned, Cohen is expected to be brought back to New York City from the federal prison in Otisville to meet with officials from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. This will be the third time Cohen is meeting with state prosecutors. And as you may remember, he's serving a 3-year sentence after pleading guilty to several crimes, including campaign finance violations tied to payments made to 2 women, Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, who alleged they had affairs with Trump a decade ago. These are affairs Trump denies. Now, investigators are exploring whether the Trump organization broke New York state law by falsifying its records and describing the reimbursement provided to Cohen for those payments. We reported last month that officials from the DA's office interviewed Cohen in Otisville when they opened their investigation. Now, a law enforcement official tells CNN Cohen is expected to tell prosecutors everything he knows about these matters. And the information he provides, if it's deemed credible, could lead to Cohen testifying before a grand jury. Cohen is one of several people with knowledge of the payments that could be of interest to prosecutors, but he has credibility issues. After all, last year he pleaded guilty to lying to Congress about that Trump Tower project in Moscow. Now, prosecutors are also pushing for Trump's tax records, with the theory being that the documents will provide definitive proof about where the money has been allocated, unveiling if there was anything that was a masking of payments that was a deliberate falsification. Allison?
Athena, thank you very much for that development. Meanwhile, President Trump's stonewalling may be frustrating for Democrats, but it's providing plenty of material for the comics. Here are your late night laughs.
Just half an hour before a key witness was scheduled to testify in front of Congress, President Trump blocked the witness from appearing. I mean, say what you will, Trump is really hitting his stride when it comes to obstructing justice, isn't he?
The big news today is that the White House has taken its fight with Congress to the next level, officially sending word that it will not participate in any aspect of the impeachment probe. Yeah, which is crazy. Like, Trump can't just decline to participate. Like, this is not the Vietnam War.
The White House made the announcement in an officially bitchy 8-page letter to Congress, writing, given that your inquiry lacks any legitimate constitutional foundation, any pretense of fairness, or even the most elementary due process protections, the executive branch cannot be expected to participate in it. Wait. You can't just not participate in your own impeachment. Sir, you are charged with assault and battery. How do you plead? Pass?
He understands humor. Not so much. All right.
It's all about timing.
Fantastic. We've got new details on the White House efforts to contain the fallout of the call to the Ukrainian president. New Day continues right now.
The White House shut down and blocked testimony by a key player at the center of the Ukraine scandal.
Democrats fighting back with subpoenas for Ambassador Gordon Sondland.
The failure to produce this witness, we consider yet additional strong evidence of obstruction.
What we see in this impeachment is a kangaroo court, and Chairman Schiff is acting like a malicious Captain Kangaroo.
We're trying to give them due process. If they choose not to avail themselves of that opportunity, it's actually their loss.
This is New Day with Alison Camerata and John Berman.
All right, we want to welcome our viewers in the United States and all around the world. This is New Day. It's another busy one because we begin with President Trump stonewalling the impeachment inquiry. The White House counsel sending a blistering 8-page letter to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and other top Democrats claiming that they lack the constitutional authority to even investigate the president. The White House calls the inquiry an illegitimate effort to overturn the 2016 election. Well, that has Speaker Pelosi warning that any attempts by the Trump administration to hide the truth will be regarded as further evidence of obstruction of justice. Democrats have now subpoenaed a key witness in the case, Ambassador Gordon Sondland. You'll remember that President Trump blocked Sondland's congressional testimony yesterday. The White House is suggesting other key witnesses will also be blocked from testifying this week.
So while the White House wants the discussion to be about process, there is important substance here, key developments in the investigation. CNN has new details about the July 25th call between President Trump and the Ukrainian president. A White House aide who listened to the conversation described it as crazy and frightening. That's according to a memo written by the whistleblower and turned over to Congress. CNN has also learned that back in May, months before the call, President Trump directed Energy Secretary Rick Perry and 2 top State Department officials to circumvent official diplomatic channels and instead deal with Rudy Giuliani after the Ukrainian president asked to meet with President Trump personally. Joining us now is CNN political analyst Maggie Haberman. She is a White House correspondent for the New York Times. Good morning, Maggie.
Good morning.
Welcome to this next stage, as the New York Times described it, war. That is what CNN is calling it, and that is clear what's going on here. The White House took days to release this letter. They were mulling releasing this letter days ago. Why ultimately did they decide to make this a fight about process rather than the substance of the investigation?
John, I think there's a couple of reasons. I think that the main one, and I think that we've been talking about this for days now, is that the basic fact set is not great for the White House. The question of legality, putting it aside, politically, this is a set of potentially damning facts. Now, you had Republicans arguing after the testimony from Kurt Volker last week that Democrats were cherry-picking the information that came out. Republicans are not in control, obviously, so I think until they are, you're going to see this focus on process. Part of the reason there was this delay from last week till now, I mean, one thing is I think that they wanted to double-check some of the arguments they were making, however aconstitutional some of them may appear. But there was a debate about whether to call for the House to put this to a vote to formally open an impeachment inquiry. The letter does not do that. It does reference that previous impeachment inquiries have taken that step, and therefore this is why this one is out of bounds. But I think the White House is aware that even some Republicans are not interested in having to record a vote on that matter.
Maggie, what's the feeling inside the White House? Are they anxious about the fact that this is all beginning, or do they think that somehow impeachment could politically help the president?
It depends on who you talk to, Allison. There is a disagreement of views on this among the various aides. There are some people who think that this could help him politically. There are people who think that the transcript of the call was truly nothing to be concerned about. There are people who think that whatever they put out, that it's going to be looked at in the worst possible light. But there are other people who recognize that an impeachment inquiry it will swamp this White House in terms of what it's doing over at least the next couple of months, that it is going to basically require all of their focus. There isn't agreement on who is actually running it. The answer you hear most often is Jared Kushner. It's not clear that Jared Kushner actually wants to be seen that way. This is something of a hot potato within the White House, where the president has given different answers by different aides as to who is in charge. And then you have the president himself, who, while he has in the past anyway, said that he sees some value politically to an impeachment fight, the reality of it, now that it's really upon him, from everyone I've spoken to, does not thrill him. No president wants to be impeached. I don't think Donald Trump is an exception.
I want to get to more of the process in a second, because you have some reporting on Trey Gowdy, which is a little, I don't want to say different, but it adds some perspective to what's going on here. Hold on for that for 1 second. I do want to talk about Gordon Sondland, who the White House pulled the rug out from under his testimony yesterday. He'd been flown to the United States. Republicans were expecting him to testify as well. And my understanding, Maggie, is that there were some Republicans who were hoping he would, because they felt like, why not have a witness who is loyal to the president here? So there is some Republican unease with what's going on here in the White House strategy.
There were Republican House members who are loyalists to the president who went to the White House yesterday to voice their concern with the fact that Gordon Sondland was not allowed to go ahead and testify. This was a decision that was made pretty late, as I understand it, the night before. And their concern was, they believe, as I said before, that there are pieces of the Volcker testimony from last week that would be beneficial to the president to have out there. They believe that Sondland could confirm some of that, or at least bolster some of that. And that's what they're hoping to do, and where they were hoping to go with it. And they felt blindsided. I mean, again, part of the problem that this White House has had is there is no consistent message or no consistent information being provided, let alone within the White House, but to allies outside of it. And I think that was part of what you saw yesterday from House Republicans as well.
Maggie, having covered this White House now for 3 years, I was not surprised that Gordon Sondland's appearance was canceled. Stonewalling is their style. Stonewalling is the go-to that we've seen throughout the Mueller investigation and now throughout this investigation. What I was surprised about was that the transcript of the phone call was put out. That's what I thought seemed to break the pattern. What's your perspective on this?
I think that the transcript of the phone call being put out, I think, was certainly surprising. And I think there are some people within the White House who, in retrospect, wish it hadn't happened, not just because there's obviously been this debate about the facts and the fact set and what it means for the president, but also that it sets a precedent, right? That they're going to be expected to put out other transcripts when questions arise. But I agree with you broadly that their strategy for all of these inquiries since the Democrats took over the House has been to basically try to starve them, to try to deny Democrats of key witnesses, to not provide documents, to say we did all of this before, and to not recognize the House's independent role as a co-equal branch of government. And you're going to see more of that clearly based on this letter going forward.
All right, Trey Gowdy, and just to remind people who he is, he was a Republican congressman who oversaw the Benghazi investigation, and he was at the White House yesterday. Maggie, is he or is he not, based on your reporting, going to serve as an outside counsel on impeachment to the president?
Maybe, most likely. But there were reports last night that Trey Gowdy had lunch with the president yesterday. There were reports several hours later that he was on board. The way that it has been described to me is, and number one, I think people got confused in the initial reports in not understanding that he was not ever supposed to be part of the White House apparatus. Number one, it was always going to be some kind of outside counsel. Number two, someone involved in the outside legal team said to me, an offer has not been made to Trey Gowdy yet. They do expect to make one. They do expect he will take it, but it wasn't a done deal as of last night. And as John and Allison, as you know, until these things are done in Trump land, and even then, they're not necessarily done. So he will likely be there. I think they would welcome his help. I think that they would welcome his help on a number of fronts, including a public-facing defense. But it is not quite there yet. Maybe that'll change in the next couple of hours, but as of last night, it wasn't done yet.
Until the president writes it on Twitter, it's not real.
That's for even sure. Then. I mean, even then, they remember we had. This actually reminds me a lot of what happened with the effort to try to form a more expansive legal team outside the White House for the president during the Mueller probe, where there was an announcement on the record from Trump's advisors that Joe DeGeneva was going to be joining the White House legal team, and then I think within a day or two, that was suddenly not the case anymore. So we'll see.
Well, in case it does become Trey Gowdy, I think that it's important to go back and see how he would feel about a president not giving documents to Congress when they are subpoenaed or when they need them for an investigation. So here is how Trey Gowdy feels about that, or did in 2012.
The notion that you can withhold information and documents from Congress, no matter whether you're the party in power or not in power, is wrong. Respect for the rule of law must mean something irrespective of the vicissitudes of political cycles.
He feels strongly that the White House cannot withhold any information or documents, Maggie.
There is a wealth of quotes from both Republicans and Democrats saying the opposite thing of what they are saying now about impeachment. Again, it isn't just Republicans. I do think that Trey Gowdy can expect to have a lot of those quotes played back to him if he is helping this legal team on this show, on a number of shows. And I think that one of the things that the Trump folks have been trying to avoid is allies and surrogates who become their own distraction. And I'm not sure that Trey Gowdy necessarily gets them there.
All right, Maggie Haberman, thank you very much for the inside scoop from D.C.
All right, there's important news in the Democratic race for president. Senator Bernie Sanders has announced he will scale back his campaign events after suffering a heart attack. Follow-up visit with his cardiologist. There's no indication that he plans to end his bid for the White House following his heart attack, but he did acknowledge that health issues will likely be something that voters will take into account. CNN's Ryan Nobles has been all over the stories up in Burlington, Vermont, where the senator is recovering from this heart attack. Ryan, what's going to happen?
Yeah, that's right, John. This news came after Sanders visited with a cardiologist here in Burlington yesterday. This was a follow-up appointment after that heart attack he suffered last week in Las Vegas. And we were a bit surprised when Sanders told us about how the heart attack was going to impact his campaign going forward. Listen to him talk about how the nature of the campaign will change.
We were doing, in some cases 5 or 6 meetings a day, 3 or 4 rallies and town meetings. And meeting with groups of people. I don't think I'm going to do that. But I certainly intend to be actively campaigning. I think we're going to change the nature of the campaign a bit, make sure that I have the strength to do what I have to do.
This is a pretty big shift for Sanders because one of the things that he has prided himself on is just how busy he is on the campaign trail. He will travel as many as 6 days a week, hold between 3 and 4 events a day. And now he says that he's actually going to become more in line with his Democratic opponents, not doing quite as many events, but he still plans to be very actively involved in this campaign. And also, John, he says he is not going anywhere. Now, it's important to keep in mind, while this is certainly a setback for Sanders, this is going to be in the back of voters' minds. He is now a 78-year-old man who suffered a heart attack that could hurt his campaign. Sanders is still a force to be reckoned with in this Democratic nomination, primarily because he's going to report $33.7 million cash on hand. Those are a lot of resources to keep the campaign moving. Even if we may not see Sanders on the campaign trail as much, expect his ideas and his voice to still be an important part of this process. But no doubt this changes the scope of the Democratic primary in a big way. John?
All right, Ryan. Ryan Nobles for us in Burlington. Please keep us posted.
I think that's really important that he's had a more rigorous schedule, he says, than other candidates, and he's going to make it equal to the other candidates now.
We'll
That's
see.
What he's saying. Yeah.
We'll see.
All right. The NBA's hopes for global expansion into China has become a political, diplomatic, and financial mess, all because of one now deleted tweet. This is the latest example of U.S. companies' struggle to balance American free market ideals and democracy with one of the biggest economies in the world. CNN Chief Business Correspondent Christine Romas joins us. How are they going to do this one?
Good morning, you two. Well, the NBA has found itself in an issue faced by airlines, hotel chains, retailers, tech companies, virtually anyone who wants to do business in China. Toe the Communist Party line on Hong Kong protests, on Uyghur Muslims, on Taiwan's independence claims, on Tibet, or face threats of losing access to the big Chinese market. Adam Silver of the NBA, by saying he respects his employees' free speech, he chose principle over profit. And you guys, that is rare, quite frankly. Now, before the Hong Kong protests, the most visible flashpoint has been Taiwan. Taiwan is a self-ruled democracy that Beijing insists be treated as part of mainland China. Airlines caved to Chinese demands to change their drop-down menus and their maps to read Taiwan, China, rather than simply Taiwan. China's aviation authority demands that Hong Kong and Macau also be clearly labeled as part of China. At the time, the U.S. government called China's language police Orwellian nonsense. But, you know, companies themselves rarely stand up against the Chinese government. Last year, The Gap apologized for a T-shirt with a map of China that did not include Taiwan. Tech blogs noticed this week that Apple is hiding the Taiwan flag from its emoji keyboard for users whose iOS settings are in Hong Kong or Macau. Last year, a Marriott employee was quickly fired, and Marriott apologized because that employee, you guys, on social media, liked a post about Tibet. Allison?
Okay, Christine, thank you very much for that update. So the White House has decided to fight the impeachment inquiry. What do Democrats do now? Well, a member of the House Intelligence Committee tells us. Next. President Trump waging war on Congress and the impeachment inquiry, cutting off all cooperation. So what is the next step for Democrats? Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. He is a member of the House Intelligence Committee. So what now? What now, Congressman? They won't cooperate with the inquiry.
Good morning, Allison. Well, now it's pretty clear what happens next, which is that witnesses that we want to interview are served subpoenas. And the president's 4-page letter notwithstanding, which, you know, made no legal sense, made no legal arguments that work. I mean, you know, the subject of an investigation doesn't get to say, hey, I don't want to cooperate here. You know, a subpoena is a very serious document. It literally means under penalty. If you don't show up, there is a penalty, jailing and fines and that sort of thing. So subpoenas will be received by all of the people that the Congress wants to talk to. They will ignore those subpoenas at their peril. You don't get to say no to a congressional subpoena. So I imagine that we will eventually get to talk to these people. Look, the objective here is not to keep folks from talking to Congress. I think anybody with any law school at all around the president will know that you can't ignore a congressional subpoena. It's just to make a political argument, which is what that letter was, and to stall for time, of course, which is pretty unfortunate because we've got a lot to do.
Well, I mean, you say that their legal argument was specious. Pat Cipollone is the White House counsel. He's the one making these legal arguments. Here is, I think, the heart of their case. So let me read it to you. This is what was in the letter to your committee's chairman. You have denied the president the right to cross-examine witnesses, to call witnesses, to receive transcripts of testimony, to have access to evidence, to have counsel present, and many other basic rights guaranteed to all Americans. What's wrong with that argument?
Well, Allison, what's wrong with that argument is it completely misunderstands the process, right? So in an impeachment proceeding, you have the House do articles of impeachment. That is akin to an indictment, right? And then you have the Senate do a trial. A trial is a place where, as all Americans know, there is a prosecutor and there is a defense, and everybody gets to see all the evidence. In an indictment, in a grand jury proceeding, which is what the House is doing, that is not true. So it's just completely specious. And I would point out to you, Allison, that the same rules that we have followed in every other investigation, Benghazi, the 8 or 9 Benghazi investigations, are being followed now. Meaning, when a witness comes before a committee, the Democrats get precisely the same amount of time as the Republicans to ask questions. And so it almost makes me sad that you read that on television, because it's just a fundamental and specious misunderstanding of what the process is. We're doing this investigation the way congressional investigations have always been done. If there is a trial in the Senate, all of the due process that the letter refers to will be observed, as it always is in any form of trial.
I mean, Congressman, I think it's helpful to have you spell that out for viewers. I don't know if all viewers are as steeped in the process and in the legality as you are. And so I think it's helpful to hear their argument and then hear you explain why you believe it's specious.
Look, I'm in politics. I understand what they're doing here, but it is just 100% completely wrong. Again, this investigation is being conducted like every other investigation has been, and all of those due process protections will be observed in the Senate. Now, what troubles me, of course, is that Pat Cipollone and the lawyers, they know this, so they are deliberately being misleading. And I don't know. I guess I've been in politics a little while, but that still makes me sad.
That's helpful. Speaking of articles of impeachment, it sounds as though Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi now believes there is ample evidence of obstruction of justice, given that Ambassador Gordon Sondland's appearance was canceled, given this letter, and that there is evidence of asking a foreign power for help investigating a political rival in the upcoming election. We've all seen the transcript. So what are you waiting for? Why not vote on the articles of impeachment now?
Well, because impeachment is a serious thing, Allison, and you know, we need an opportunity to talk to the witnesses who are in the room. Look, despite what the president is saying, the whistleblower complaint is very specific, and it is fully corroborated, as you point out, by the so-called transcript that the White House put out there. And by the way, by the president himself, who looked into a whole bunch of television cameras and said, hey, China, you too ought to investigate Joe Biden. You know, you're right. The facts aren't really much in dispute here. But, you know, you don't rush to judgment. You don't do this without taking due care. And look, you need to dispose of some arguments. The Secretary of State is still trying to convince the American people that this is something that we do. You know, and Allison, the reality is that we probably over the generations have worked with hundreds of countries on corruption. Right? There are a lot of corrupt countries out there. So hundreds of times we've gone to countries who say we want to work with you to reduce corruption. Not in a single one of those instances, not ever, not once, has working with other countries on corruption involved the president saying, I want you to investigate this person who happens to be my political opponent. So, you know, we've got to do away with a lot of the absolute baloney that people like the Secretary of State of the United States of America have been putting out there so that the American people understand the facts about what is happening here.
Congressman, is there any chance left in your mind that this Friday former Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch appears to answer questions?
We'll see. It's a personal question because I'm booked on a 6 a.m. flight to go hear that deposition. But you know, look, I assume based on the position that the White House has taken that there's a good chance that they will prevent her from testifying, which is a real problem, Allison, because as you know, we don't talk as much about this part of it, but it would appear, and this is an allegation, it would appear that she was fired from her position as ambassador to Ukraine because she didn't go along with the whole circus, the whole Rudy Giuliani, let's hold up aid in exchange for investigating the Bidens thing. If that is true, that in and of itself is a pretty serious thing. So I hope she appears, but based on the White House letter, she may need a subpoena in order to come before the Congress.
Congressman Jim Himes, thank you very much for explaining the position of your committee today. Great to talk to you. John.
Thank you, Allison.
All right, explosive allegations against former Today Show anchor Matt Lauer. A former colleague is now accusing him of rape. There is a new response from NBC. Breaking news, one of the women accusing former Today Show anchor Matt Lauer of misconduct is breaking her silence. A former NBC News producer tells her story in a new book written by Ronan Farrow. In it, she accuses Lauer of raping her, which ultimately led to Lauer's firing. Moments ago, NBC addressed the allegations on the Today Show. CNN chief media correspondent Brian Stelter here with all the details. Brian.
Yes, NBC is responding to this for the first time. Lauer has not yet. But here's what's new. Here's what we know that's breaking overnight. Variety magazine has published excerpts of Ronan Farrow's new book. It contains these allegations about Lauer's conduct when he was the host of the Today Show. Farrow spoke for the first time on the record with the woman whose claims led to Lauer's firing. Her name is Brooke Nevels. She's a former NBC News producer and a former assistant to Meredith Vieira. She tells Farrow that she was raped by Lauer while they were there covering the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi, Russia. Nevels alleges that this happened after a night of drinking with Vieira and Lauer at a hotel bar. She says she had 6 shots of vodka, and then Lauer invited her up to her room, but according to Farrow, she had no reason to suspect that Lauer would be anything but friendly based on prior experience. Nevels then says that once in the room, Lauer forced himself onto her and raped her. Nevels tells Farrow, quote, it was non-consensual, in the sense that I was too drunk to consent. Now, this did not end there. Nevels tells Farrow that she and Lauer had other consensual sexual encounters later on. She describes them this way, saying it was completely transactional. It was not a relationship. Nevels did not immediately report this alleged attack to NBC Universal executives. She says she confided in Vieira 3 years later, that's in 2017, and Vieira urged her to get a lawyer and report it to NBC Human Resources. That's what Nevels did, and that's what led to Lauer's firing. Now, so far, Lauer has not responded to these new allegations. Nevels has not responded to our request for comment. But we have heard from NBC News. Just now, NBC releasing a statement to me saying this, quote, Matt Lauer's conduct was appalling, horrific, and reprehensible, and we said it at the time. That's why we fired him within 24 hours of us first learning of the complaint. Our hearts break again for our colleague. Now, it's remarkable to see how the Today Show's hosts, Savannah Guthrie and Hoda Kotb, are handling this. Here's how Savannah addressed it on the air just moments ago.
You know, this is shocking and appalling, and I honestly don't even know what to say about it. I want to say that I know it wasn't easy for our colleague Brooke to come forward then. It's not easy now. And we support her and any women who have come forward with claims. And it's just very painful for all of us at NBC and who are at the Today Show. And, you know, it's very, very, very difficult.
Think back 2 years to 2017. At the time, NBC said that Lauer was fired due to an inappropriate sexual relationship at the workplace. Well, this is more than that. As Kotb said this morning, this is not the allegation of an affair, it's the allegation of a crime. Again, Lauer has not responded today, but here's what he said back when he was fired in 2017. He expressed remorse, saying, there are no words to express my sorrow and regret for the pain I have caused others. He went on to say that his words, to the people that I have hurt, I am truly sorry. As I'm writing this, I realize the depth of the damage and disappointment I have left behind at home and at NBC. Lauer went on to say, some of what is being said about me is untrue or mischaracterized, but there's enough truth in these stories to make me feel embarrassed and ashamed. And he said he regrets that he's hurt the people that he cherishes the most. So that's what Lauer said then. The allegations were involving harassment, involving inappropriate sexual behavior. Basically, the idea back then was that he was abusing his power as a big star to have affairs with women at the office. But again, this allegation in Farrow's book is very different. It is the allegation of a crime. And by the way, Farrow also reports that Nevels left NBC in 2018, and she was paid out 7 figures at that time. So, Allison, John, you all remember Lauer was accused by others of harassment, but this really takes it to a different level.
And just to be clear, one more time, this isn't misconduct. What she's describing isn't misconduct. It's not harassment. It's a violent crime.
And I think it's going to raise new questions about who knew what when and whether NBC had the right protections in place for its employees. Now, NBC News Chair Andy Lack is out with a new statement now saying that's our highest priority. We have to ensure a workplace for everyone where everyone feels safe and protected. That's what he's saying now. And by the way, he wasn't even in charge in 2014 when this allegedly happened. But it does make you think once again about workplace protections for everybody.
This is not over. Brian, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, the Trump administration's letter to Congress declaring war on the impeachment process is being met with some harsh criticism. One former Justice Department official writes, wow, this letter is bananas, a barely lawyered temper tantrum, a middle finger to Congress and its oversight responsibilities. No member of Congress should accept it, no matter his or her view on the behavior of Pelosi, Schiff, or Trump. Things are bad. Things will get worse. The author of that tweet was Greg Nunziata. He joins us now. He was general counsel to Senator Marco Rubio and worked in the Justice Department under George W. Bush. Mr. Nunziata, thank you very much for being here. Your tweet got our attention. When you say this is bananas, what part is most bananas?
Well, in general, the letter reads like a very political document. It doesn't read like it even came from a lawyer. It doesn't read like a normal example of the back and forth we have between presidents and Congress over the scope of oversight. It's a complete declaration of war, as you said, on the impeachment process and Congress's oversight responsibilities. Look, regardless of what anyone thinks about Ukraine and what the president may or may not have done and whether or not that rises to the level of an impeachable offense, we should be concerned with a White House that is attempting to delegitimize Congress's oversight powers. We're not always going to have, if you're a fan of President Trump, we're not always going to have a President Trump in the White House. Someday we'll have a president that you might not like. And we're going to want Congress to have the ability to enforce its oversight responsibilities that are really inherent in its constitutional role.
One of the things that the White House seems to be hanging their argument on is that there was no official vote to begin an impeachment inquiry. Does that hold any legal legitimacy to you?
No. I mean, it's been done before in previous processes. I think it should be done again. I think the Speaker is making a mistake in terms of accountability and a mistake in terms of, the perception of the legitimacy of this process. There should be a vote, but there is nothing in the Constitution that requires it. Courts have been very clear that Congress has wide authority to set its own rules and its own procedures. It's not a serious argument to suggest that the White House can refuse to comply with oversight because there's been no vote to establish an impeachment inquiry.
You also wrote in your tweet, as I read, a barely lawyered temper tantrum. But of course, it was sent by Pat Cipollone, who's the White House counsel. He's a lawyer. So what's he getting wrong? Why did he not lawyer this up enough in your mind?
I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know the history of how this letter was written, but clearly the decision was made to send a political document to Congress and to attempt to just attack the Democrats and delegitimize this process. Again, you don't have to like what Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff are doing. You don't have to think they're handling it well. I think both of them have made some serious mistakes here. I think, yes, that Democrats have been out to get President Trump forever. But that's not how a lawyer engages in this. We have some oversight requests that are legitimate, that are inherent in the power of Congress, and the president is within his rights and should assert the institutional concerns of the White House, executive privilege when appropriate, but this blanket rejection of congressional oversight just because it's Democrats doing it is not what the founders envisioned. It's a political process. The founding fathers considered where we would put the impeachment power. They could have put it in the courts. They could have put it in a realm where we have these procedures that we're all accustomed to, the right to confront the accused, attorney-client privilege. They chose to not put it there. They chose to give it to the political branch, and it's a political process. Politicians in Congress will act in their political interests, and they'll be held accountable. If there is no substance to this allegation, if this doesn't rise to the level of impeachment, voters will hold them accountable. And that's how it's meant to play out in our system. Rejecting it is as illegitimate is just not serious.
When you say things will get worse, what does that mean?
Well, I mean that and there's faults on this on both sides, certainly. We, in our political system, increasingly live to just win today's fight. And we don't think about institutional responsibilities. We don't think about how the branches of government are meant to be balanced. And I think this is a very destructive thing that this White House is risking throwing away congressional oversight, risking a real constitutional crisis, which we've not arrived at yet, but just to win today's fight. Again, if they are so confident that nothing was done wrong here, they will win in the end. I think the White House did a good thing by cooperating with Mueller's probe. It mostly helped them politically at the end of the day, and they should be working to do that now. And everybody in Capitol Hill should think about the system that we've inherited that's lasted for 200 years and do their duties according to the Constitution, not just according to today's headline or today's partisan advantage.
I only have a few seconds left, but as we mentioned, you were general counsel to Senator Marco Rubio for several years until 2016. You were the special assistant to the Justice Department under George W. Bush. Why do you think more Republicans aren't coming out and saying what you're saying today?
Look, I think these are heated times, and it's understandable that people want to defend the president. It's understandable that people are angry at some things the Democrats have done. But I think if you talk to most lawyers, they will, even conservative lawyers, they will agree with much of what I've said here. This is an institutional concern. It's not about what Trump did or what Pelosi or Schiff have said or done.
Greg Nunziata, we really appreciate you coming on and explaining all this to us. Thanks so much.
Thank you for the time.
I think that was such an important discussion. I hope people listen to that Republican attorney who just made the case that this is not a serious legal document that was issued by the White House.
I think it was bananas.
And to treat it as a serious legal argument ends up being misleading here. I think people need to listen to what Greg Nunziata just said there.
Who are you referring to?
I'm not saying you. I'm saying the discussion arguing over the merits of the White House letter here is a disservice. All right. What was the one last